This is Comic Shenanigans, episode 1090, a conversation with Chuck Austen.
Ain't no stopping them shenanigans. Love getting into shenanigans. All up in them shenanigans. 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 Shenanigans.
Welcome to the Comic Shenanigans podcast. This is episode 1090. I'm your host, Adam Chapman. This is yet another conversation with Chuck Austen, who's been on the show a few times in the past. If you want to check out his previous appearances, you can check out episode 814, 850, 1033 and 1083. So he's now a member of the Five Timers Club. This time, unlike the last couple, we have him just solo and not with Pat Olliffe, but instead just on his own. So we talk about working on Edgeworld Season 3, which is starting very soon, the second week of May. So I'm very excited to have that come out. I've actually had the chance of reading the first few issues, so it's definitely interesting and enjoyable as always, but it is different as we get into in here just because we have a new artist on the book, Chuck Austen himself. So this was a lot of fun to be able to talk with Chuck about this. We also talk about working on EXILES, which has always been a favorite title of mine when it was running back in the day. I think I've had a chance to talk to Tony Bedard, Judd Winnick, and Chris Claremont, although not about EXILES, and also Chuck Austen about EXILES. So I think I've, for the most part, hit most of the main writers of the original EXILES run. I think I'm missing Jim Calafiore because he did do a couple issues here and there. But this was a lot of fun. I think you're really going to enjoy this episode. Chuck is always such a great guest. He's really interesting stories that he tells, and this was some interesting perspectives on working on different things, both his more modern work and his older work. So I really enjoyed this. You can email me at comicshenanigans@gmail.com. You can rate the show on Apple Podcasts, listen to us on Apple Podcasts, and also listen to us on Spotify. We've had some issues with scheduling lately, so some apologies. Originally, this episode, it was going to be this episode, and then, it was going to be a David Papo's episode, which I was very excited about. And unfortunately, the recording software recorded it, but then immediately it disappeared. And so an hour and a half conversation went into the ether, which I was very bummed about. And then the next day I recorded with Chuck, and I actually had extra redundancies because I was super paranoid that it was going to fail. So I had like two different ways of recording it to varying degrees of success. Anyways, they both worked, thankfully, and one had better fidelity, so I just went with that one. So that was a bit of a bummer. And then kind of a late in the game, we thought we might have an episode talking about the Thunderbolts movie, and we were actually going to record on it, and then that just kind of didn't work at the very last minute. It just kind of went a little late. It was Thursday night, not a Friday night when we watched it, so that ended up not happening either. So it went from being originally to episode 1090 was going to be the David Proposed episode, then it was going to be the Chuck Austen episode, then it was going to be a Thunderbolts episode. Now it's back to being the Chuck Austen episode. It was a lot of fun behind the scenes shenanigans, which is living up to the name of the show. Anyways, thank you so much for downloading the episode. I really appreciate it. Email me if you have any questions or thoughts about the show, or things we can do to make it better, or things you'd like to see. And thanks again for listening, and let's jump right into the episode with Chuck Austen. Enjoy. Chuck, welcome back to the Comic Shenanigans podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Adam. Thanks for having me again.
It's always a pleasure to have you here, although it almost seems weird to have you here without Pat.
I know. It's just like my sidekick is gone. It's so odd. Maybe I should have my cat in here to sort of make me feel like I'm not so alone.
See, I was going to ask, are you Batman or Robin? But I guess it sounds like you're Batman if he's the sidekick.
God, it's not fair to Pat. We alternate being Batman and Robin. Sometimes I'm Robin, sometimes he's Batman. Like on Tormented. Tormented was more his Batman.
True. So this is your fifth time on the show, so thanks for reaching the Five Timers Club. I'll send you a jacket.
Thank you. Been really eagerly looking forward to that.
As we're sitting down to talk, we are very close to having Edgeworld Season 3 actually starting very soon. It's coming out May 13th is the first issue. This episode, I believe, is coming out on May 3rd, so we're very close to Edgeworld Season 3. Now, this is the big difference this time around is that obviously in the first 10 issues, it was you writing, you had Pat on art, and this time we have Pat for one issue, issue 12, but the rest is actually going to be drawn by you and illustrated by you, and this is obviously kind of a return to form. I mean, when you kind of broke into the comic industry, you were doing art, your own storytelling, and obviously most people these days think of you as the writer, but you actually are an artist as well. So what was it like taking on this, this opportunity and also having to succeed Pat, which is no small order?
No, it's not. Oh my God. It was actually weird, really weird. In fact, it was, Pat and I, the original idea behind what we were doing was that we would come up with these ideas and then he and I would go off and create the next new thing, and then we would get another artist to replace him on whatever the previous project was, and we'd just keep going. So we weren't able to find an artist for Edgeworld while he was off doing Tormented and then off doing Defiant. And it's been so long since I've done it, it never even occurred to me to be the artist on the project until, I don't know, one day I was talking to Jeff, the head of Comixology, really nice guy, and I explained to him, what the situation was, and I said, I'm the only artist I know that's available, and then all of a sudden I kind of went, oh, I am an artist, I could do this, because at the moment I had finished all the writing stuff that I was doing on the other projects. The scripts were all in and approved, and Pat was working away on Defiant, so, but it had been a really, really long time since I had done pages, and they at Comixology were not entirely sure that they wanted somebody else to draw the book besides Pat, because everybody loves Pat, and they'd gotten really used to his style on the book, and I'd gotten really used to his style on the book. So I wound up having to do some of my audition pages to get approved to do the series in the first place. And it wasn't easy. It took me a week to do each page. I did 2 sample pages to send in. And at first I told Jeff, I said, I don't think I can do this. It's a lot of work. Drawing comic books is a lot of work, man. I don't know how I ever thought I could do it professionally. But then I started using a computer to kind of help me as like a computer assist and help to do some of the tones and shadow shading. And then there was, Pat turned me on to Clip Studio Pro and some specialized brushes that he uses, and over time I got myself up to speed and I was able to do about a page a day, a little more than a day, and so that was enough. That was enough to be able to get it over the finish line, and then the more I did it, the more I enjoyed it. I really started having a great time, but really only after I stopped trying to imitate Pat and started kind of going back to my old original style, or what my evolved original style was, did I really start to feel comfortable and good about it. But eventually I did. At first I didn't. I hated what I was doing, and I missed Pat, and I thought Pat was it made me appreciate him a lot more, I'll tell you that. That guy does so much work and puts in so many characters in all those panels, and there's all those background people and all those aliens and running around, and oh my God, I didn't think I could I don't see how anybody can do what that guy does. He's just fantastic.
So I'm curious, just from the standpoint of when you ended the 10th issue, you were on a cliffhanger, right? So obviously Now you're going to pick up and resolve the cliffhanger. So what I'm curious about is, how did it come to be that Pat does issue 12 and not issue 11? Just because thematically it seems like it would, not that your artwork isn't fantastic as well on 11, but you would think that, if Pat was going to do any of the issues, it would be the first one. So I'm curious kind of how that happened.
That is it's an embarrassing story, I guess, to say. Originally what had happened is we got approved for the 2 series back to back. So issues 6 through 15 had all been approved, and so we were going to just do them all, turn them in, and we thought that they were going to go month to month. And then, so what happened is, as Pat and I were working the stories out and writing them, we had actually done issue 12 was going to be I believe it was issue 4, 4 or 5. I wasn't real, it was part of the previous arc originally.
Oh.
And after he had already drawn it, we realized that one of the characters had so much more potential and was really kind of getting short shrift. This character named Kataka. And there was so much more that we could do, and we started to see that there were threads that could be tied through to kind of deal with the overall ending and the full arc that we had in mind. So Pat and I talked about it and said, let's just delay 12. Then you do 10 and then 11. You can start 11 later after you finish Tormented. So we actually we changed, I think it was originally issue 6 or 7. Might have been 7. And then, so we took that, just renumbered it 12 and moved it to the back, assuming that Pat was going to also draw issue 11. And then when he got off on finishing Tormented and then Defiant, there was just no way that we could come back. There had been a big change in my life, where I wasn't working in LA anymore. I was kind of moving my way towards retirement. So the finances to cover all the expenses that needed to be covered. Whoa. Sounded like something landed there in your office.
Yeah, I didn't think you could hear that. Yeah, sorry about that.
That's okay. I'm just making sure you weren't like carried off by the aliens or something.
Thankfully, I'm still here.
Oh, good. Okay. So anyway, this is sort of a very long and complicated story, but basically it was because we wanted to make the story richer, and that involved expanding the role of one particular character. And Pat was originally supposed to draw it, and then he couldn't, and so I wound up drawing 11, 12 already being done, and then went back in on 13, 14, and 15.
Now, when you're doing, I guess 11, 13, 14, 15, when you're approaching the scripts, so just to reorient myself here, had you written the scripts at all before you realized that it wasn't going to be Pat and that you were, again, looking for a different artist? Or when did you start writing those scripts knowing that you were the artist?
No, I wrote those scripts for Pat. They were already done. In fact, I'd done several versions of them, because usually what I'll do is I'll write a script, send it to Pat, he'll give me thoughts and notes, and then I'll go back and do a revision for him. So we'd gone through that phase. I'd already done the revisions for him, and then I just used those as the basis for what I was going to do. I did make some alterations as I was going, because we wanted to wrap up the series somewhat. I mean, we're kind of tying it together so that a lot of the bigger questions get answered by 15. But it was pretty written. So I followed my own script like an artist. This panel has this image, this panel has this image, and like Pat, I would also make adjustments sometimes to my script, or I'd get a better idea for a better camera angle, or break panels into 2. And but yeah, it was all written. It was all ready to go.
Now, you mentioned before the idea of, kind of auditioning for your own book,
Yeah.
Like, what is that? Was that a very surreal experience, being like, that one, again, as you said, like you hadn't really been actively working in comic art in so long. So kind of figuring it out, and figuring out the process, but also the weirdness of kind of, auditioning for yourself, essentially, to be able to bring your own words to life. How surreal of an experience was that?
It was very surreal. But it was really necessary too. I mean, I hadn't drawn a comic book page in 20 some years. The last comic book I drew was before my son was born, and he's 21 now. So I felt like it was necessary. I mean, I said I could do the art, but I didn't really know that I could do the art. So I wanted to sit down and see if I could do it. I also loved Pat's style, so I wanted to try to get as close to his style as I possibly could. And I didn't know if I could. I didn't know if it was possible. So I wanted to audition as much as they wanted me to audition. And like I said, I got to a point where I thought, I just can't make this work. It was so hard to do what Pat does. And I was way out of practice, but I did finally figure it out. So it was a really surreal experience, super weird. But at the same time, it was incredibly rewarding, because I've always loved comics, and the thought that I could actually sit down and do enough pages to make an entire issue, or an entire, in this case, 4 issues. It was kind of fun. I really, it was like going back to my roots again. And so I guess for all of those reasons, it was incredibly surreal. It was good. It was bad. It was weird. And at the same time, I feel like a poser coming in, because Pat he defined this series. He made it look fantastic, and I'm as big a fan of his work as anybody else. So it was tough.
I kind of want to see an Edgeworld issue now where he writes it and you do the art.
I would like him to. He's got some fantastic ideas. I don't think he's ever put them together in a full script before, or maybe he did. I think he did a Frankenstein thing years ago. But that's a great idea. I'll have to push him on that if we get to do more.
I'm curious, when I was kind of looking through some of the issues, what really struck me, and it made me think about what the collaboration would have been like with you and Lee, because, you know, Lee's still the colorist, but it does have a different, you know, kind of coloring style, which makes sense because you have a different artistic style than Pat. So the marriage of colors and your artwork would be a little bit different. So I'm curious, did you have conversations with Lee about how the colors were going to work because your style is so different?
I did a little bit. I mean, not conversations. Lee and I don't think Lee and I have ever talked on the telephone, or any other way. I don't think I've ever heard his voice. But we had a chat back and forth where I told him what I was doing, and I sent him some sample images, and I even had him color up those first 2 sample pages to see how it would work. And then we talked about how best to make it work because of the style that I was using. So he did make some adjustments, but at the same time, the artwork kind of, I mean, I work with a much more chiaroscuro style than Pat does. Pat does a lot of this beautiful feathering and rendering, and I tend to do more heavy contrast blacks and whites. And so the color, it's a like you just said, they're different styles somewhat, so that they have the coloring requires that you make adjustments to it a little bit. And but he was totally game. In fact, we've sort of experimented around with stuff a little bit with gray tones in ways that have been really kind of fun. You know, trying things that we hadn't done before. So. But he's such a professional. He's been doing this over so many different people for so many years. His pretty much his responses are like, yeah, I can do that. Yeah, cool, no problem. You know. So. How
often, when you were doing the art, did Chuck Austen, the artist, shake his fist at Chuck Austen, the writer? Like, it's an interesting juxtaposition because you, especially as you said, because originally you had Pat in mind. So you had certain things that you knew Pat could do, that were leaning on maybe Pat's strengths because you guys work so well together, and you have a good sense of what he can bring to the table. Now you do have a different artist, just happens to be you. So as an artist, were you thinking like, why did I write this? Like, why I can't do this? Like, this is a Pat thing. Like, how much modulation did you find you had to do to make it fit what you knew you could visually bring to the table?
Oh, I had to make huge adjustments for that. Because Pat is much more of a sort of like he's a dark horror kind of guy. So all the stuff that I write, I tend to skew for him visually in that direction. So I'm writing things, and I'll call him up and I'll say, I'm kind of nervous about this. It's pretty creepy. What do you think? Do you think this is like going too far? And he's going, no. I don't think that's too far at all. That's no problem. But then I'm a much more squeamish guy. I'm a romantic. I'm like, I'm a sort of a comedy guy. I can write this stuff on the script and I can sort of visualize it in my head the way that I want it to be. But it's really written for Pat's strengths and his interests and his passions. So when I was doing, especially issue 11, which is, for those people who know about the book already, it leads into, let's say, a human meatpacking plant. I don't think I'm spoiling anything because that happens in issue 10, but it gets a little more grisly and a little more gruesome, and it was stuff that I was literally texting Pat and saying, "Damn it, Pat! I didn't write this for me. It's making my skin crawl." And he would just laugh. He thought it was hilarious. So, but yeah, it was definitely written for Pat's strengths. And so it was a huge adjustment for me, but it was also something, it was pushing me in directions I'd never gone before. So, I always love trying things I've never done before. So it turned out to be kind of fun. And in the end, people were like, what are you so creeped out about this? It's like, it's not that big a deal. For people who watch horror or are into that kind of stuff, it's like, this is no big deal. So, but for me, it was a big deal.
I'm curious. I mean, this is kind of, as you said before, kind of reigniting the artistic, kind of fire within you. But the advantage of working on something like this, in many ways, is that you're working on a pre-established property, a pre-established visual aesthetic, and a world. Would you want to be working on a project where you're kind of building it from the ground up, or is that something that feels harder to kind of come up with the idea of kind of putting together a big world, as opposed to, it's almost like you're a director working on a pre-existing show in terms of coming after Pat, because there's already been a visual language and now you're manipulating it in different ways, but you still have that to kind of lean on. So would you want to do something where you kind of build it from the ground up artistically?
I might. In fact, I've done stuff before where I've sort of toyed around with samples of what I would do if I were doing my own thing. It tends to lean a little more heavily on the comedy and the drama. Like I said, I'm a romantic, so there's often a heavy romance element to whatever it is that I'm doing. So, in some ways I'd like to, but I think the biggest reason for wanting to do that is that in so many ways I just see Edgeworld as mine and Pat's. The idea of me doing it without him just feels wrong somehow. It's like the visual style was created by him and invented by him, and I loved it. He would do things that I hadn't thought of when we've talked about that before, but stuff that I would write, I had certain visuals in mind, and he went in a different direction that was just way better. So I guess that for me, the downside of doing stuff just for me is that I don't, like I said, I get more excited when I'm out of my comfort zone a little bit. If I'm doing something that's for me to draw, then I'm completely in my own comfort zone. So I'm not really pushing beyond that, and it's not as exciting. I'm a collaborative guy. It's one of the reasons why I worked so well in animation and television, because I like working with other people, and I like having other ideas contributed and brought to the plate. I don't like it to be all just my thing. Maybe it's my own insecurities, but I don't know if can you hear my cat howling?
I can.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me let her in. She's not used to me being here. Will you stop? Stop. My son is at school, so she's just like, I don't want to be alone. She's just
that I get. We recently said goodbye to our cat, so I understand what that's like. It's actually almost weird that I don't have someone meowing at me every morning now. Like we've had cats for the last 16 years, and this is the first time in the last week that we're cat free, and it's a very weird experience. So I get that.
Yeah, I'm sure. I can't imagine what it's going to be like when she's not around. So yeah, I get it. It's funny. My son is the cat person. I'm not really a cat person. I'm more of a dog person, but I definitely have gotten used to having her around. Will you? Shh. I'm doing an interview, of course. Now you decide to do this, but she's quiet all day long, hiding on his bed. Then she hears me come in here and hears me talking, and
she has to be part of it.
She does. She does.
A question about, when you start drawing Edgeworld, I'm curious, did you create for yourself kind of model sheets so that you could kind of practice and understand the different angles of Killian so you better understand it? Obviously, again, we have a version that Pat has done, and yours is obviously drawing upon that, but it is also in your style. So I'm curious if you kind of went back to basics and sort of, creating model sheets of all the different characters so that you would become more comfortable with them, or how did you get more comfortable with the characters? Because it's not just that you're drawing people, there are very specific body shapes and types that Pat has given you he's given you more work to do. So I'm curious, how much prep work did you find yourself doing to make sure that everything would look on model?
I did a ton. And in a lot of ways, I don't feel like I got close enough to what he was originally intending, because the part of the process involved is that I actually put together 3D models of the characters and did full turnarounds of them so that I could have drop them into sets and output them, and essentially using them as like photo reference to draw over. And in order to get it done as cleanly and efficiently as possible, in some cases I was using bought models or pre-existing models that I had. So I was trying to make it look as close to Pat's stuff as I possibly could, and it just never really felt like I got there. But the flip side of that is that it gave me so much more latitude in where do I set the camera? How do I pose the character? How do I get this expression? How do I get this light source? There were some scenes, and you've seen all the way, up to some of the later stuff, but there are some scenes where I was able to set a light in a room to create a fire effect, and then I could use the lighting that was set up in the CG environment to work from, to make it really look like everything was being affected by that light source. So there were things that I could do that Pat wasn't able to do. So that's where I started feeling like, okay, now this is like becoming much more fun for me. It's because I'm able to do things that would have been even really hard for Pat to do. It would have taken him a long time to figure out by hand. So yeah, I did. I set up every character, got them in full turnaround. Made decisions about how to dress them, how to make them, what kind of hair they had, what kind of everything. And there were times when I would call up Pat and I'd say, who did you base this on? Where did this character? I don't know. I just made it up out of my head, like a character. Because he would often do character shots, and so I thought that he did that with every character. So there's a character named Galen that I was like, where did you reference him? Did you have something? He says, no. What you see in the comics, what you got? He's just some guy that I made up as I was going. And I'm like, oh man. So sometimes it was hard. It was like I'm taking these little thumbnail background character drawings and trying to make them look like what Pat did, and it was difficult. But once I got it down to a place where it started feeling good, there were some real advantages to it. So I actually enjoyed it. I don't know, did I answer your question? I feel like I sort of wandered off there a little bit on the 3D stuff.
No, you very much did. I mean, the question started with about model sheets and creating models, and so you've explained how you did that, how you manipulated different effects you could do, and how you could prove yourself better than Pat in certain areas.
In certain areas, yes, because it's basically my goal to make everybody forget Pat. Like, who was that guy?
I'm gonna move on from Edgeworld and go way back to the 2000s. But is there anything else you want to say about Edgeworld to kind of tee people up for season 3 that's about to start?
No, other than it's wrapping up the big first epic storyline. So I hope people enjoy it. I hope people come along for the ride.
As I've said before, like, I've really enjoyed the world that you and Pat kind of started putting together, and so I do feel. I mean, I've read, I guess, up to issue 14, and it feels like a nice continuation of all of this, and a lot of intrigue, a lot of interesting. It's interesting. It did make me feel that you guys like to introduce characters and kill them, and make me care, and then something bad happens to the characters, and I'm like, man, guys, like, it is a testament to your skills as a writer that you make me care. And so even though I haven't known these characters very long, I'm already like, oh man.
Well, thank you.
Well, I guess you're good at creating characters that people care about and bond to. And then when you do something terrible to them, we're a little upset by it.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to hear that you're upset.
So we're gonna jump in the Wayback Machine. We're gonna go back 20 or so years, a little bit more. I'm really curious about when you're writing Exiles, and I was looking at it again to try and kind of get myself in the mindset of what was going on at the time, and it brought up a lot of questions because in my mind, I think of, Chuck was writing Exiles. He wrote it for a while, but that wasn't really the case. You were kind of bopping in. You'd write 5 issues. You jump out. Judd Winnick would come back, write 6. You'd write 3. Then Jim Calafiore would do 2. Then you're doing some more, and then someone else takes on the book going forward. And I thought, wow, that's so not the way I remembered it as a reader. So I'm curious what it was like for you to work on a book like that, where you're not the main guy, but you kind of are for like a little while, but you're kind of subbing in and out with other writers. That seems like such an interesting way to work. So I'm curious how that came about.
That's funny. That it was a little, and it was convoluted in the background. I think that's one of the reasons why it seemed convoluted in the comics in retrospect. But Judd Winnick had gotten an opportunity to write, I think, a Green Lantern series at DC. But in order to do it, it meant that he needed to take a break. He was writing something for DC, and he was given, and he wanted to take the opportunity, and Joe didn't want him to. He wanted him to stay, but it was just one of those things where I think Judd got really excited about the idea, but it was always supposed to be a temporary deal. So they asked if I would step in while he was at DC, until he could come back and just do a few issues. And Judd was, he was like anybody, I guess. He loved the characters, and he'd gotten a little possessive about him and wanted to do them his way. But he was grateful that I was going to step in and give him an opportunity. But he was also a little nervous about what I was going to do with him while they were gone. So he had a conversation with Mike Raich about some of the things that they had sort of loosely talked about because they didn't really know themselves exactly where they were going to go with it. And Mike Raich he was a big X-Files guy. He was, X-lore guy. Mm-hmm. So he knew all of the weird characters and obscure characters, and he loved Marvel, so he knew a lot of the obscure Marvel characters. So once Judd stepped out, Mike called me up and he says, "Hey, you want to just step in and help on, for like an arc, like a trade?" And I said, "Yeah, I think that'd be fun." Because I loved working with him and Mike Martz in the X office. So, but I said, I don't know these characters as well as you do. And he says, "No problem. I'll be able to help you out. In fact, I can sort of like go through and explain to you sort of where we might want to go with this." And I said, that would be great. So he and I started talking back and forth and bouncing ideas back and forth. And then he would take all of those ideas that we had and put them in a very rough draft of a script and send it to me. And I would turn it into a full script for Jim Calafiore. I think Jim was the artist on those issues. And then that's sort of how we basically moved forward with it from there. It started off as I was just going to take over for a few issues, and then it became kind of this collaborative thing between Mike Raich and I, where we were actually having a blast working on the characters. So to the point where we actually discussed the idea of me sticking around, but if Judd decided that he wasn't going to come back, but then Judd did come back. So, I stepped aside again, and then I wound up doing something else where it was all right because I couldn't come back and do it anyway. And then when Judd was ready to leave, I think he got a full offer from DC at that point to go work for them contractually. That was during the period when they were signing everybody to contracts, and you couldn't work for Marvel if you worked for DC, and you couldn't work for DC if you worked for Marvel. And so I think Judd made the decision to sign a contract. He was a young guy. I believe he was getting married and talking about a family. So, the contract was a good thing for him. So he went to DC and sort of lit a fire under some of the characters that they had over there. And then Mike Raich and I came back in for another run on, and I don't remember specifically what it was that we were writing about it the second time through. And then as we were doing that, and I was getting other offers to do other stuff, Calafiore stepped in and said, "Hey, you know what? I've always wanted to write. Can I take a shot?" And so he worked with Mike Raich after I left, and I believe that's how it all. I believe that's the specifics of how all that worked out that way. It just had to do with everybody. Judd was busy, and then I was free, and then I was busy, and then Judd was free, and then Judd left, and then Jim was free. So it was basically just one of those kinds of things. If it had been more settled up front, I might have stayed on as the writer on Exiles for longer, but I would have enjoyed it. I think Mike and I had a great time working together. So, but it just worked out the way it worked out.
I will say, as someone who, I didn't know that obviously that was kind of the musical chairs happening behind the scenes. It never feels that way in the narrative. In fact, your first issue, which is issue 26, picks up right from, where we kind of left the characters in issue 25. And there's a lot going on, and yet it doesn't feel like you really missed a beat. And you have a lot of very, upset characters at that point, because they had just gone through a lot. They had a new member of the team. This new member of the team is very no nonsense. Basically, they have to go, let these Avengers die. And so, our main quote unquote main heroes that we're used to are trying to do the right thing. And this new character's no, we've got to go kill these people. So you immediately have, the characters at odds with each other because Magic has just showed up and she's no nonsense. And yet it doesn't feel like you've missed a beat from the previous issue. In fact, what I thought was interesting in the first couple issues that you do, and then when you come back later, is that it's almost like your narrative style changed and you became more comfortable with the way that Exiles narration boxes usually worked. Because after I went back, I was like, oh, it does change for a couple of issues. Then it kind of reverts to Judd's style. But when you come back, you do end up feeling more like the previous narration style. I don't know if that makes sense at all.
Yeah, it totally makes sense, and it did happen that way. In that we were following along with Judd's original ideas. Mike was kind of the consistency maker. He was the one who said this is what we were thinking, and this is what we hadn't figured out. They hadn't at that point figured out what the real goals were. And it actually opened up some of the story ideas that why they were doing this, what they were resetting. Were they supposed to let people die? Were they supposed to save people? So there was a whole, none of those questions had been fully fleshed out. They hadn't actually figured out why they were there, what was happening. So we were able to kind of continue running with that. And in the process of dealing with that, I wasn't always thinking of keeping consistency with the way Judd approached things, with the sort of the style, writing style. And there's always that, it's like with Edgeworld, it's like taking over from the previous guy. You're so worried about kind of maintaining that style that sometimes you miss things. There's just stuff that's like, oh, I didn't realize he did that all the time, or that was his approach. So the second time around, I felt more comfortable. It was kind of like, well, I did it once, people liked it. They had great response from the fans the previous time. So, in fact, I would run into people and they would say, "Yeah, you know what? I'm enjoying Uncanny," but then they would hold up a copy of Exiles and they go, "But this, oh my God, this!" They just, they loved Exiles. So when I came back the second time, I felt a lot less like Judd's fill-in guy and more like, okay, I know what I'm doing on this book now. I understand the characters. I know where we're going, and the morph magic relationship and stuff was fun to deal with, and so it was great. But a lot of that is just, you get the opportunity to stop being the replacement guy, and you start feeling more like the guy. It changes your approach, and you start to feel more comfortable.
I think it's interesting as well that sometimes we as readers forget that comic books is a constant marathon, and trying to get issues out the door is so frenetic.
Yeah.
And it's there, especially at this time, right? This time would have been like monthly grind is everything, and it was really like get the books out the door. So I'm curious. So you do the first two issues, which is a nice little 2-part arc, and then you have a 3-part arc, which kind of broke convention that we were used to at that point with Exiles, in that you brought it to the main 616, and that really makes me curious, like, why, if they were going to do this, why didn't it end up kind of cross-pollinating with your Uncanny at the same time? Like, obviously it's set in and around that period. You use a lot of characters from your Uncanny X-Men run, but reading it again, I'm like, why didn't they just make it a full-blown crossover between the two books? Because again, this was the first time that you were that this book was entering into the 616 space. So I'm curious, what were the conversations with, I guess the Mikes like at this time to, even if this was the right move to bring them into the 616 this relatively early? I mean, the book had been around 2 years, so it's not that early, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, oh yeah, I know exactly what you mean. It's particularly because so much of the industry has become built around the event, so why didn't we think about making it more of an event at the time? And really that just had to do with the behind the scenes circumstances, and that we weren't even sure that we were ever going to come to the 616 universe. But then Mike and I started talking about some ideas and some ways that it could work. And in a way, by the time we got into it, it was almost too late to do a big crossover and promotion, because I was ahead on one of the reasons they were having me do it is I was ahead on some of the scripts that I was doing for Uncanny. So going back and I was like, they could never keep a consistent artist on Uncanny. So a lot of the scripts that I would get would go out to 3 or 4 different artists to get them working so that they could get their books on time. But it meant that, you couldn't make adjustments or changes. So there wasn't really the opportunity to do it. I think if we had realized how it was going to go, we probably would have made something bigger out of it, but they're just really scheduling wise and whatnot. And also the idea that we weren't sure we wanted to even do the 616, go into the 616 universe at all. We wanted to keep it completely separate. That was the whole idea with Exiles, was that it didn't have anything to do with the regular universe. You were looking at the regular universe characters through a skewed lens. But so, like I said, things behind the scenes would get strange and chaotic, and it was really, there's 2 guys working in the X offices taking care of all of those books and all this stuff. Sometimes there just wasn't time to get it all worked out that way. You did it. Somebody got an idea, well, we did it. People liked it. We just went with it.
For sure. It's interesting reading it in retrospect because, again, Havoc plays such a pivotal part in the Exiles coming to the 616, and obviously Havoc was a big part of your Uncanny run as well, and so much happens with him, but again, not in the pages of Uncanny X-Men. So it's really interesting that, like, the X-Men aren't just bit players, they're really at the center of why the Exiles are there, and yet it's not in an Uncanny X-Men book, which is, it's just so interesting from retrospect to read it and be like, this seems pretty big, it's not over there.
Yeah, and that was just because I was writing the other book, so I was able to this is what I can do this with the characters and know how it's going to affect, the continuity of that book. Yeah, it was weird. I grant you. It's just all I can say is that sometimes things at Marvel, little chaotic and unexpected, which was part of the fun of it, honestly.
It's interesting to reread it because it is so grounded in a very specific period, because, it's all the characters, like the characters that are there, I forget what the wolf characters are, like, it was things I was like, oh yeah, I forgot about this completely. Like, it was just such a very particular era, so it was interesting to kind of have the Exiles get dropped into early 2000s, Uncanny X-Men book, as opposed to it being something different, which I thought was really interesting. And I'm enjoying that kind of stuff more and more now, where, you're almost like you're jumping in a time machine reading a book like this, because it is so grounded in a very particular era and particular versions of characters, a particular version of Juggernaut, etc. One thing I didn't mention is that you have Clayton Henry doing artwork on the first few issues that you're doing, and his style is very clean, very, I don't want to say cartoony because I think it makes it sound too far a certain direction, but there was kind of an open expressiveness to it that was definitely different than Califiore, definitely different than Uncanny X-Men at this particular time, because you had a lot of different styles coming in and out. So rereading it now, I really enjoyed how loose Clayton Henry's stuff was here.
Yeah, it's funny. I haven't seen a lot of those guys since I left comics back in the day. But yeah, I loved Clayton's work. He was just a young guy at the time. I think that might have been his first real series work. And that was also played a part in it. It's like, okay, we want to see what this guy can do. Let's give him a sort of a mini arc within the series. And I don't remember if he may have had something to do with using the 616 characters. I don't remember. So much of what I was writing at the time, it got a little crazy at the time, but they were having a difficult time keeping a consistent artist on Uncanny, so they were always kind of testing the waters with different people to see if they could do it. And sometimes they could, and sometimes they couldn't. There was a lot of really talented young men and coming through that at that point. So there was a lot of times where I would write like a short arc or a mini arc to give to somebody to see if they could, follow through or finish, and without giving them a hardcore deadline. They were given a hardcore deadline, but they were not. But they had more latitude because it was a separate chunk to miss a deadline if they didn't think they could make it or if they could do it. So I think that may have been one of the things that was going on with Clayton at the time, is that they wanted to see if he could stick with a monthly schedule. So there was a lot of that kind of thing going on, particularly with me on Uncanny, where we were always doing stuff to try to test out one artist or another. I mean, I think they wanted to see it, even with Kia Asamiya. He was obviously a master in the business, and he had done a ton of stuff in Japan, but he'd never done an American comic before. He's the kind of guy that he's so legendary in Japan that really, if you're going to bring him over, you should give him all of the main X-Men and Magneto, But instead he winds up doing the Dominant Species, which was us trying to rehabilitate some old villains, because all the good villains were being used in the other books, particularly Grant's books, so they were hands off. So a lot of my job was trying to find old villains and rehabilitate them and make them, tough guys for the X-Men to fight. And then some of those individual arcs would be given to, different artists to try to see if we could find a regular. And I think that was around the time Salvador LaRocca came in and became the regular guy on Uncanny for a while. So,
that's right. Forgot about that. If I move forward for a moment, so you do your 5 issues. When it comes back for 7, and then this is where I'm very curious about, again, kind of the behind the scenes mechanics of it. Thinking about it now, is that he leaves a big cliffhanger. Kills off Sunfire, Blink comes back, and the last page. And then the next 3 issues are probably 3 of my favorite issues that you've written in this period, which is where you introduce the Hyperion character on the Weapon X squad. So no forward momentum on Exiles, because now we're doing this Weapon X story, which is really engrossing. Then Jim Calafiore again does his 2 issues, which is a flashback. And now, issue 43, it's now 6 months later, now you're following up on Winnick's his big kind of bombshell and moving forward on your own. I'm very curious, first of all, doing the Weapon X story, was that designed to be kind of almost like not a fill-in, so to speak, but something they could easily plop in because it's a different team doing similar things, but not having to be exactly on Blink and crew, or not? Well, I guess at that point it would have been Blake and crew again, but I'm just curious where the idea came up to devote, 3 months of stories to this other squad.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was part of it too. I'm not sure that, I mean, at that point I believe Judd had made the decision that he was not coming back at that point, by the time I came back from that arc. Mm-hmm. I could be misremembering, because I forgot there were 3 passes where he was gone. But I believe that there was a chance that he might still come back or find a way to do his stuff at DC and still write the book. So that was also a part of it. that it's like, okay, let's do this Hyperion story, and I have to give Mike Raich credit for that idea. That was not my original idea, but once he suggested it, it was like, oh my God, yes, because it was just the intensity level just got ratcheted up. It's basically what if Superman comes in and you realize, oh, it's evil Superman, and he's not going to follow any rules. He's just going to make himself king. So it was just a great arc. It was one of those things where it kind of killed two birds with one stone. It's like, well, this gives Judd a little more time to figure out if he's going to be back or not. I think at that point they were pretty sure he probably wouldn't be, but there's a possibility. And then they had Jim coming in with his arc, and that would give enough time to make the final decision. So yeah, so that was part of it, was that let's not screw with what he did just in case, and let's do this separate arc. And plus, I think Mike came up with the idea, and we just really liked it so much, we thought, yeah, let's just, no matter what, let's just do this. It's just too intense not to.
It definitely, I mean, it's nice. It's a nice play on, we already know there's another team out there that will do things that our team won't do, or the kind of more the wet work squad of reality jumping characters. But again, what you do and the intensity that you give Hyperion, which is interesting because he gets more intense later when he's King Hyperion and he's bald, and it almost feels like he couldn't be more intense, but there's just something so subversive. And you working with, I guess it was Calafiore, on the art was just so, there's just something to how he drew Hyperion throughout the story, because he would look at at other characters or almost at the camera, and you almost want to believe that he's, this good-natured Superman, and then he does something absolutely atrocious right away. And it was a really interesting juxtaposition, and just to see how some of the characters might have, at times been on the rougher end, but they weren't lunatics and they weren't trying to rule the world. And then you had characters like Spider, who's just a murderer. And so it was a really interesting kind of way of bringing all the characters together. I think what I really liked is how you had Gambit kind of being the soul of the team and slowly realizing that he's totally lost the thread. And now this other guy's just a maniac.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it has always been a story I really enjoyed. That first 3-part arc is always been something I've enjoyed rereading. But then when you actually have the full King Hyperion arc, where basically there's too many reality jumping characters on this earth, and most of them have to die, and only a certain number are going to survive, has always been like a really thrilling story, but also a really interesting way of thinning out the herd. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, it was fun. I really enjoyed that one. That was the great thing about the book, is that it was just, you're unleashed. You can get away with anything. And Calafiore just did a fantastic job with the artwork. We just had a great time. That was fun. I really enjoyed that. I'm glad you liked it too. Who
was your favorite Exile to write?
I think, honestly, I think Morph and Magic, especially. Magic was interesting to write because she was really fun to write, because there was such a vulnerability to her. She didn't realize how messed up she was. And Morph was somebody who cared so much and really wanted to help, and probably was the only one who could, but it just wasn't enough, I mean, it was, there's something about those sort of like tragic, flawed yet vulnerable characters that, even now I still love writing. There's just something really interesting about people who want to be better, and it's just like their internal demons are just fighting them so hard. So I guess those were the ones that I had most, but Hyperion was a blast, I gotta say. There is something great about writing somebody who's just so powerful and so convinced of his own rightness. And like you said, we could juxtapose those moments where he seemed like the good guy, and he really wasn't. It was just, and Mike and I had just a great time. Such fun on that book. I really don't think there was anything about it that I didn't enjoy writing. I think we just had a great time.
It's interesting hearing you talk about magic because it makes sense for how you write her that you were enjoying, kind of exploring her. And also she's yours, right? Like she, you for the most part get to kind of build up a character from the ground up in terms of how they're going to be written, I should say. And what I like about it is that you have this character coming in seemingly being, kind of flippant and being willing to do the hard things. But when she's on her own, you're like, no, she's dealing with this. She's just better at masking it than others. And then you have later on her kind of breaking down with Morph and that this is getting to her. She's not what she exudes this harder shell, but really there's something else in there. And we see it right from her first appearance that you kind of delve into, where she basically has tasked with killing these Avengers, one of which is her brother. And so, what better way to kind of contrast this character who looks like they're all business and then being like, but no, she has to kill her brother, what that's going to be like for her.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that. I love writing that kind of stuff. I mean, it's multi-layered, multifaceted characters that are just, they're just so much more fascinating to me. And it also, just from a dramatic story standpoint, it gives the reader or the audience this mystery. Like, is she going to turn? Is she going to heal? Is she going to get better? Or is she going to kill everybody? Is it? So it ratchets up the hope and it ratchets up the drama at the same time, and it keeps people on the edge of their seat. And it's not the kind of thing, one of the reasons I liked writing Exiles so much is because that's not the kind of thing you can do in like a book like Uncanny. A lot of people gave me grief for what I did with Lorna in Uncanny with the Red Wedding and all that. But the fact is that in Uncanny you can't really do that with those characters. They sort of have their established history and their established personalities, and you can tweak them and play with them a little bit. And I was able to do what I could do with Lorna because of what Grant had basically messed her up in Genosha so badly that she had done all of this crazy stuff in his book. And so when I brought her over, I just maintained that because of what we're talking about. It's like, what demons are haunting this person? What is their personality? Can they bring themselves back? Is that mystery keeps people wondering. It keeps them on the edge of their seat. I was planning on doing the same thing with Yellow Jacket in Avengers, but Avengers didn't work out so well. So.
Well, Chuck, thank you so much for taking the time to chat about Exiles with me. As I've said, I've always been a huge Exiles fan. I've been able to talk with Judd about it. It's nice to be able to talk about it with you as well. So, this is definitely stuff that I remember very fondly. I got to read it over the past week and been like, oh man, this still works. This still hits. And again, you had some great collaborations with both Clayton and also with Jim. So those issues still work. So if you can find them somewhere, or if you can access Marvel Unlimited and read them again, you should go back and experience your own work again because it still works.
Well, thanks very much, Adam. I will definitely take your advice and do that.
And then for those listening, again, May 13th, we have the launch of Edgeworld Season 3, starting with issue 11. I believe it's supposed to come out monthly. And then hopefully we see Defiant at some point, because it was such a great first issue. So I'm hoping to see more Defiant and see more of what you and Pat have to dream up.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Well, thank you again. I'll have you back at some point, and knowing us, it'll probably be with Pat. So I'm very excited for that time in the future. But again, good luck with everything. Good luck with the launch of Season 3 of Edgeworld, and I can't wait to have you back on in the future.
Thank you, Adam. It's always a pleasure. It's always great talking to you.